Live.
Nice.
And welcome, Saaya, to this session. Happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
How are you doing?
Good. Allergies, but good.
Nice.
How about you?
It's part of living in Sweden, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. How about you? How are things?
All good, all good. Preparing for some vacations. I mean, I have 3 kids, so I have plenty of activities
Yeah.
to
Are all
do.
the kids off for summer now?
Yeah, they are going actually going for summer today. So like vacation today. So 6 weeks vacation for them. But
That'll be lovely.
yeah. So and welcome everyone else that are watching this session as well. I'm really happy to have you here. And you are the ones that makes it possible for us to actually host these kind of sessions. So hope you're doing great. And we have been doing this HiCareer live sessions for a couple of weeks now. So we had Pietro joining us for our first session, Pietro from Neo4j. And then last week we had Linus Diestelkamp, freelancing tech recruiter, who've been at like some different companies joining us. But now we're switching topics a bit. So we have spent 2 weeks of like going behind the scenes of how recruiters are like considering like candidates throughout the process. But now we have Saaya here, co-founder at Emigreat. So really curious to hear what you have to say about how like international talents or intertalents. That's kind of a common word in your industry, right?
I think so. I think there's a lot of discussion around the wording because obviously international talents then kind of implies or it reduces people to what they can like what skills or talents they can bring. So we've kind of gone through all the different phases of how we refer to people. So now I either just say like internationals or international employees, or obviously there's that discussion around the words immigrant versus expats, but we typically say then internationals because obviously there can be people in Sweden, for example, on other permit types that are also looking for jobs that they're not international employees yet, but they are actually still living abroad in that sense. But it's quite convoluted. There's no like one way to actually say it.
Yeah, there are a lot of buzzwords in your industry as well, so to say.
Yeah.
So cool. And for you who's watching this, feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat at any time, and I will try to bring up as many questions as possible to the table. So super happy also if you are sitting here and want to like shortly like introduce yourself, like where are you right now and what is your situation like. So let's make this a great discussion, so to say. I have an agenda, of course, and we will start with deep diving a bit more into Saaya, or your journey, getting to understand what took you from being a scuba diving instructor to move to Sweden. I mean, I have friends that are scuba diving here in Sweden, but it's quite a different thing.
Yeah.
So super curious to hear about your journey, and then we will jump into talking about more like practical advices and hacks regarding all, like maybe we will not be able to go through all like immigration like regulations and stuff, but hopefully the most important things, both for you that are considering moving to Sweden, but also for you who's living in Sweden and that want to stay safe or stay as secure as possible in this quite messy job market. And and then like we will just have a short summary and bring in some key takeaways for you. So
I guess then in brief about me, so my name is Saaya. I am the CEO and co-founder of a Swedish-based startup called Emigreat. So we're basically building a platform currently that supports individuals through their kind of global mobility journey. So helping people understand what the requirements are, the processes, as well as kind of soft landing tips in terms of what you need to do after you arrive to a country. Right now, all of our content is based around Sweden, but we are expanding to other countries, including Spain, over the next few months as well. As well as then we also then do B2B support for companies in Sweden that are managing their work permit applications. In terms of how I came to kind of this journey is I've actually lived abroad my entire life. So I'm an American citizen, but I was born and raised in Japan. So from, when I was 2 months old, I was on residence permits. So I had permanent residency in Japan, and then I moved to the US for university, and then actually went into the scuba diving industry. So then I moved to Palau, Thailand, Indonesia. I did a stint back in Japan for a year, and then I was 6 years in Honduras. And then 6 months before COVID hit, actually, we sold our scuba diving business, and then we moved to Sweden, where my husband is from. And actually, Sweden was the first place I had a lot of residence permit issues. So I actually had to leave during COVID, and I was stuck in Japan when the borders closed, because then my residence permit hadn't come through yet, and we had some complications. And that's how I connected with my co-founder Annalie, because we met on LinkedIn, but there was the discussion around, like, I had the resources and the time to wait, and it was inconvenient and it was distressing, but like we could afford that wait. But we thought about the fact that, like, there are so many people that don't have those resources to wait. But there's a lot of people of, like, with the resources I had, if I still made mistakes, then how many mistakes are other people making? So that was kind of the basis around Emigreat.
Cool. Thanks for that. And what would you say are like the key differences between, like, immigration kind of like regulations and stuff in Sweden compared to like other countries that you've been at? Why is it so complicated?
It is complicated, but it's also not, in terms of, I think that in a lot of ways, for some permit types, it's easier. Or, like, for example, there's been that big discussion about it's been easier to get citizenship in Sweden, for example, compared to other countries in terms of the requirements and time. But then there are certain parts of Swedish immigration that aren't sticking with, like, current EU regulations. So there's a proposal now to change things to match more to the EU directive regarding how closely people are tied with their employers when it comes to work permits here. But I would say, like, it's a combination of, like, easier and harder. I think that Sweden is also one of the slower places to actually process residence permits, though, which has been a big point of contention and discussion as well in the international community.
Get it. And regarding Emigreat story, like, can you deep dive a bit more into, like, how it started, and how it's going, or what has happened since the start? A couple of years.
How are any startups doing right now? So Emigreat actually started, the idea for it started before I actually came into the picture. Of my co-founder Annalie, is she had quit her job in Sweden, and then she realized that she had actually been paying, like, I think, like 2 sets of union fees, but no, like, unemployment insurance. So then when she quit, there were all these things, and she was kind of shocked, because she was like, I've been giving advice to other people, and I made a fairly big mistake. So then there was the idea around, how could you make the immigration process, like, less convoluted or just more easy to understand? I think it's seen a lot of iterations since then. There was the discussion first around B2C, then there was, should it be a nonprofit? Then we went B2B, because I'm sure you saw it as well. In 2013, it felt like all VCs and all investors wanted to see B2B SaaS. And there was that general push towards that. And then we had that discussion around the fact that, obviously, when it comes to work permit applications, the company has to be involved, and they need to fulfill different requirements as well. So it made sense to go B2B. 2024 was a really difficult year for both companies, I think, as well as for individuals. But, like, certainly a lot of startups we saw went bankrupt. There were a lot of larger organizations that went bankrupt as well. Oh, that's my cat in the back. And what actually pushed us in the direction further of let's go back to our roots, which is to build for immigrants by immigrants, because both Anali and I are from abroad, was largely the Northvolt bankruptcy. Because when that happened, there were obviously a lot of people that had work permits through Northvolt that then were losing their right to stay in Sweden. And we do 30-minute consultations, and everybody that was booking these consultations were individuals.
Yeah.
So then we had this understanding of it's still like it is ultimately, even though the companies are responsible, if the company goes bankrupt or if the company makes a mistake, it's still the individual that gets deported. It's still them that loses their right to residence. So then we thought, okay, let's go back then to our roots of B2C so that individuals can be educated on what needs to be done and help them plan for their futures as well, and kind of put that focus on future proofing their right to stay in Sweden.
Get it. So, and going a bit back to when you came to Sweden, like what would you say based on your own learnings and maybe all your discussions with other immigrants, like what would be the single most important thing to for someone who's like considering moving to Sweden to know about?
I think there's a few things. Obviously, if you were thinking of moving to Sweden full time, you should visit here in the winter first. Like 100%. Because if you come in the summer, the days are insanely long and it's beautiful. I've gotten used to the winters, but my first winter here was incredibly rough. Like I was not used to how dark it was going to be. And I think a lot of people struggle with that then, because you typically, like I moved here in July and it was like an amazing time. And then November hit and I was really struggling. I think people also don't realize how hard it can be to build a community here. What I've generally noticed for like a lot of Swedes is a lot of times people have like a few friends that they've had since childhood and they have a very close-knit group. And it can be difficult. Like once you're in, you're very much in.
Yeah.
But it can be difficult to get in because you don't usually just talk to people in the street, or you have to meet people a lot of times before you're invited to their home and things like that. So it's a very different way of networking and socializing compared to, for example, Latin America or maybe southern parts of Europe.
Yeah.
For me, I was quite fortunate because like my husband, who is Swedish, had still some network in Sweden, but also he was super invested in making sure that I enjoyed life here. So like he really focused on how can like we make friends sort of thing. And also Japanese people are kind of similar. So for me, it wasn't a culture shock in that sense, but like it can be very isolating. And you will go through a period of time where you feel very much alone. And I don't think people are prepared for how alone they're going to feel.
Would you say that there are big differences between different parts or cities in Sweden? Have you noticed that? Or is it more of a general?
I'm not sure. I've heard, from what I've heard from people, Gothenburg, for example, can be more social than Stockholm. I think because it's a smaller city, there's obviously a massive international population here because we have GU and Chalmers. So we have like, there's a huge population here that are international students doing their, higher education. And I think in general, maybe like West Coast, like from what I've heard, potentially like Gothenburg and Malmö, for example, are easier. But I think if you were to go out to like a very small village, that might be more difficult. And then I've heard that Stockholm, because it's so big, people, I think you tend to stick more to your pockets as well. Whereas Gothenburg, you can get from point A to point B in 15 minutes.
So it's a bit more convenient, and there are some like local communities that you can find.
Yeah, but I've also heard that like even like people from Gothenburg that moved like Swedes can like have a more difficult time in Stockholm, for example, simply because it is a bigger city.
Yeah. Get it. Just going back before we will jump into some questions from the audience here. Thanks, Raquel from Brazil, or living in Sweden, and Ras for your questions here. We will come back to them, but first, like regarding Northvolt, that's quite a big thing here in Sweden, or has been for a couple of months. Like, what do you do there to support like the people that are like affected by it?
I mean, when Northvolt happened, the first thing we did was do like a webinar right away about what happens if you're laid off as a work permit holder.
Yeah.
And then I also started creating like content and guides and stuff on how to navigate those situations. Unfortunately, when it came to the consultations that I did for Northvolt people, about 90% of it was bad news that I was giving, which was a really difficult time. I spent about 2 months basically only telling people that thought they had alternatives, that those alternatives weren't feasible, which was then for me like mentally quite taxing, because you don't want to be the person that tells people only bad news. But it also taught me a lot regarding like how can people be better informed when making decisions of like some of these people in the Northvolt situation. This could have been prevented if they had better information before they made the decision to work there.
Get it. Your video froze a bit. I don't know if it froze for you as well, but maybe.
I don't think so. Could everybody hear all that, or does anybody want?
Now you're back.
Okay.
Yeah. I could hear everything perfectly, but just to make sure.
Perfect. I think, for example, I spoke with a lot of people that actually left their master's programs to work at Northvolt. So they didn't finish their education, and then they switched over to Northvolt, which I understand the appeal, because you go from paying a tuition to then getting a salary instead.
Yeah.
But unlike for Swedes, who then you can, if you get laid off, you can go back to school. It's not a big deal. If you're on a work permit, you cannot go back to a student permit from inside of Sweden. But I think a lot of people made that choice because they thought, oh, if it doesn't work out with work, I can go back and finish my master's. They got an official leave from their universities. So they thought that that was enough. Yeah. And it's not the case. So I think that's really important for people to know, is like, if you get a job offer while you're doing your master's or like your higher education in Sweden, at least, well, I know that it's tempting to take that. You're kind of screwed if you end up getting laid off, because it's more difficult to find another job if you don't have your degree. It's a really competitive market right now. So you have to be as highly qualified as possible, and you can't transition back to a student permit to finish your education from inside Sweden. And that's really, really difficult to go through, especially if you have a family that you've moved to Sweden with you.
Get it.
As well.
We can actually jump into the questions here that I think it's pretty relevant here. So Raquel, Brazilian living in Gothenburg, and the company she was working for closed their facility here. So regarding self-employment here in Sweden, like what can you do? So let's say that you lose your job, like you can find an employment, or you can do like self-employment.
Yeah. So this is generally something that I talk about a lot as well, is for most people, I do tell them that whenever you start your work permit, it's good to already start thinking about what your self-employment opportunities could be, and to actually continuously focus on a business plan, even when you have job security. Because when you lose your employment, or when you lose your job, you have 3 months from your last date of employment to either find a new job or submit an application for a self-employment permit. I'm sure you know, Fredrik, 3 months is not a lot of time to find a new job here, which means that typically people will end up falling back on the self-employment permit. A lot of people will actually submit self-employment permit applications as a way to buy themselves time to then, I'll submit the self-employment application, I'll get then some time, and then if I find another job, I can submit a work permit application, which in theory is correct. But if you submit a self-employment application that's incomplete, clearly not a legitimate like application that clearly looks like it's a way to buy yourself more time, then you could face trouble later, because then Migrationsverket will say, well, you just did that to buy yourself more time. Therefore, we're not going to grant your next work permit from inside of Sweden. In terms of requirement for self-employment, there's quite a few, and the acceptance rate is quite low. In 2024, there were 109 self-employment permits that were issued, and there were certainly more than 109 that were more than 109 applications. And I don't know whether that comes down to incredibly like high demands, or people obviously applying as a last ditch effort to buy themselves more time, but not fulfilling any of the requirements. But typically certain things around self-employment is you obviously have to have a business that's viable and like you have Swedish clients. Because if all your clients are abroad, then what is the point of having your business in Sweden? Would be the general question. There's a heavier requirement right now on speaking Swedish. So if you don't speak Swedish, it's good to put in a plan of like who you plan to have in the company that can speak Swedish, in terms of kind of fulfilling client relationships and requirements. You need to have certain finances, so at least 200,000 crowns set aside for yourself, plus more for family members, not including expenses for the business, and a fairly fleshed out business plan. And now they're starting to take more into consideration when you registered your business. So people that register their business just before they apply for the self-employment permit, they'll think that that was too soon. Then they'll say, oh, so you were never planning on being self-employed. So then I typically recommend to people that like, just register a business early, whether you use it or not, especially for a sole trader. It doesn't cost much to do that, but at least you have that. And then start developing relationships early that could potentially turn into letters of intent. Save up your finances and then work on your business plan throughout your employment as a just in case, so that you're not spending 3 months scrambling to set one up. But I can have a longer list that I can put onto HiCareer as comments on HiCareer's page as well.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for that. And but it sounds like having a very proactive approach is kind of key here in order to get things approved. I mean, in some way, the regulations or Migrationsverket, they act how they act, and in the end, it's all about like accepting it for what it is. So
I think it's also important for people. I know that in other situations, obviously, like if you lose your job, oh, this is my chance to pursue that dream I've always wanted. But if, for example, you work as an IT consultant and you lose your job, then it's a much better bet to create your own like independent IT consultancy than, for example, to start a Korean food truck. If you have no experience and no education, like, unfortunately, this isn't the time to pursue your long lost dreams. You have to go with the conservative approach in this situation.
Conservative and a bit more rational to stay safe. Thanks a lot for that. And you mentioned just shortly that the Swedish language is quite important for Migrationsverket, but we discussed this a bit yesterday when we were preparing for this session, that it might be a bit underrated to learn the Swedish language, because Swedish people, they always like switch to English, like they're really confident that, well, okay, we can speak English. But you said that Swedish is important.
Yes. I think Swedish is important. When I moved to Sweden, even Swedes were like, oh, you don't have to learn Swedish. We all speak English, and that's true. But I think you can develop deeper relationships with Swedes if you obviously speak the language that people are most comfortable in. Because everybody, like most people, I think 80% of the cities can speak Swedish, but that doesn't mean that that's the language they're most comfortable in. So I think that you can develop better relationships with Swedes if you speak Swedish. A lot of jobs will secretly have the requirement for speaking Swedish, but it's not listed. And I think it's helpful if you do, because you can also just navigate a lot more bureaucratic landscapes if you speak Swedish as well. So generally, like for international students, I suggest you should start learning Swedish as soon as you start your education. And most universities offer free Swedish lessons as well. So take advantage of all those resources available.
And maybe also preparing if you're like about to move to Sweden, maybe like start get to know the language. And yeah, we have Duolingo for languages. So
I don't know how much the Duolingo bird might like shoot me in my sleep, but I don't know how crazy I am about that, because I also, how you think you're pronouncing things is not really often the way it should be pronounced. And I don't know if Duolingo and those sort of things provide good enough feedback for that sort of thing.
Okay, but still, learn the language as fast as possible. That's a key. And I can also add to that, I've been working with both recruiting and career coaching, and it's as you say, like most Swedes, they say that okay, English is fine, but in some way, when they evaluate candidates, they're still a bit like leaning more into candidates that actually are like more can speak it in the office. So I think it opens up more job opportunities. So good thing to have.
Absolutely.
So cool. And Saaya, let's see if we have any more questions here. First of all, so we have Russ here. Who's okay, Russ, you're an EU citizen, but and want to move to Sweden for good, but from the official channels regarding paying taxes and transferring salary, it's not super clear what you can do here. Do you have any like tips and advice?
Nothing that I can go through, I think, very quickly. I would say as an EU citizen, your main things is obviously like you need to have right to residence if you're going to live in another EU country for more than 3 months. And typically the way that EU citizens have right to residence is through work, study, or kind of their own personal finances. The main thing you would need to do if you move to Sweden and you plan to work more or live here for more than 3 months is you would need to apply for a residence card from Migrationsverket and then register yourself with Skatteverket, which is the tax agency. I'm not 100% sure regarding working remotely, to be honest, because I'm not a tax expert, but in general, the Swedish tax authority, I would say, is the best when it comes to customer service and getting you the answers that you need, because it's in their interest that you pay. So I think the general thing is that I would recommend calling the tax agency about it or emailing them, because they'll give you probably the best answers regarding that. But you may benefit from like having your company do an employer of record for you. So actually then hire you in Sweden through an EOR entity, and then the taxes are sorted quite easily.
I was muted. Yeah. Thanks for that answer as well. Let's move on a bit more, going back to the agenda. I try to be a bit flexible with the agenda because I love when you in the audience ask questions. I think that's the most important thing here. But just like some short practical advice, like for internationals considering moving to Sweden, you were like discussing that a bit, but what are like the main things to consider before moving to Sweden? Like trying to summarize that a bit. Like,
I mean, I see a lot of posts regarding like people that are like, oh, I want to move to Sweden. How do I get there? Obviously, if you're non-EU, then the way to move here would be either as a student or with a job. I think even people that move here for their spouses, I think that people need to have an understanding of how difficult the job market currently is. It's a very difficult market. And so I think that people should prepare themselves early by figuring out how do Swedish recruitment agencies or Swedish employers, like what's a Swedish CV style, because that's obviously different from other CV styles. The general one that they talk about is like for American CVs, you want to talk about what you did. What did you bring value with each job that you did? Whereas in Sweden, you want to focus on how you can be part of the community, how well do you work with others, I think is one that they typically focus on. And then LinkedIn is super important in Sweden, and I didn't realize how important it was when I moved here. So I think that if you're just thinking about moving to Sweden, start building up your LinkedIn profile. Post about things that interest you, that are your niche interests. And also, every year, the Swedish Migration Agency publishes a list of jobs that are on the occupational shortage list. And those are jobs that they're obviously having a difficult time filling in Sweden, that are growing faster than what they can fill with domestically, and that have a better chance of having work permits actually go through as well. So I would always say, like, keep an eye on that occupational shortage list and upskill or reskill yourself in skills that fit that shortage list. But I think it's always about like preparing yourself to match the Swedish job market in order to make yourself as appealing as possible. And also just start creating a strong network here. I think that like warm introductions is so important in Sweden.
Yeah, and hopefully it answers a bit your questions here, Udit. A junior data scientist looking to move to Sweden. So if we summarize this, like, try to adapt your CV or resume to have the tonality that actually matches how the hiring managers or how the people think in Sweden. So that's one thing. Number two, build a strong network proactively. It sounds like you recommend a bit that you should proactively maybe connect with recruiters, connect with like people in Sweden. And I can add to that it might be a good thing to just like, randomly connect to someone at the company that you would like to work with in the future, and maybe like ask some super like simple questions like, what should I think about, or can you give me any advice? Like asking just a super open kind question could make a big difference. So do you have anything else? Oh, and learn Swedish.
Yes. On top of that, I would say, so obviously like connecting with people in a company that you want to work at, but like I think it can work with a slow burn. So see what they post, write a comment, like comment on some of their posts with like insightful feedback, because then it makes them remember your name. Then send a LinkedIn connection request saying, oh, I found the stuff that you post really interesting. And then they're more likely to accept it, because typically if they're fairly high ranking people in a company or they're recruiters, they're going to be getting so many connection requests that a lot of them they may not actually accept. So I think that like doing that a bit more like slow dating with them. And then, like you say, connect with them, ask them something, and ask for their feedback or ask for their recommendations. Can be a really good way to kind of get yourself on their radar in terms of awareness. But don't go in with an ask immediately. That works in other cultures, but it doesn't work here, I would say.
Get it. Thanks for that. Hopefully that provided you some insights. I have another question here to add. So Sandra is wondering if it's possible to transition from a work permit to a research permit smoothly.
So actually, yes. That is the one student permit that you can transition to from a work permit is PhD or researcher. And you can do that from inside of Sweden. Obviously, it's key that you have to apply for that before your work permit or your grace period expires. But you can make that transition. The only thing I suppose is just making sure that the salary requirements are fulfilled. And in that case, also then if you want to do research or PhD, I think that's another one where network is super important, right? Like in general, I think a lot of those positions are typically the university already has in mind who they want. So I think it's important to just like stay on their radar and continuously develop your relationship with the university if that's the path that you want to go. But there's no route that's more advisable between switching from research to work or work to research. Both of those can be done. So it really just depends on your own path.
Cool. Thanks. And hopefully, Sandra, you get a good answer on that question. And again, Udit had a short question here. We can deep dive a bit more into what to include in a Swedish style resume. You said that it's the way it might be about the tonality, it's more about like how you can what you can contribute with to the team and to the company. So is that the main thing to switch, or are there any other things in your?
I think that is one of the main things. Obviously, if you can keep it to one page, it's better. Like, you really shouldn't be submitting a 5-page CV unless it's, I think, like, especially with non-relevant things. So you don't necessarily need to write where you went to high school, for example, when you're talking about your education. I think, I'm not sure what you would know this more, I think, Fredrik, in terms of photo, because I've heard that like photo's not like a no-go, but I've also heard that like obviously they shouldn't be judging based on photo. So I think that one is, what's your take on a photo in a CV?
That's a really good question. Back to me. I would say that even if you shouldn't get judged if you don't have, or if you have a photo or this kind of things, people judge. I mean, recruitment is still made in quite a manual way. So there are not like most companies, they don't use like AI so much. We've had that in the previous sessions as well. But most companies, they don't like AI, they don't use AI to like qualify you or disqualify you in the early stage. So it's like human beings sitting there, like watching a resume. And I mean, for most of the hiring managers or the companies I've worked with previously, I think like, many of them wants a photo. And if they can't see who you are on the resume or in the resume, you should have like a link to LinkedIn or anything, because they will Google for it, or they will just like try to find that. So I think it's better to just like have the photo there, because like even if you don't want to, like people they subjectively analyze everything, maybe unconsciously a bit, but that's how the game works. Like, and even like if someone don't want to hire you based on who you look, I don't think that that's a good workplace to be at anyways.
No, I think the key for that one is obviously making sure then that it's like a professional headshot. So like, don't maybe do a photo of yourself at the beach or something like that. I've also heard, and I thought about this a lot as well when I was looking for work before Emigreat. I considered changing my name, because there's a typical running thing that like in Sweden, at least, if you're looking for jobs, then having a Swedish name can be more beneficial. I think I'm of two minds about this. I think that if, for example, you're born in Sweden, you are Swedish in terms of like speaking Swedish and all of that, and you want to change your name, then I think that's okay, and you can become like Sven Svensson. But I think that if you
it's really common name, right?
That's true. But
Fredrik Johansson, that's
but I think that it can go worse for you. Like if I were to change my name to then like Sara Svensson, and then I show up and I don't speak Swedish like a Sara Svensson, then to my interview, then that can actually impact me worse than being honest about who I am from the beginning. So I don't think that, I know that it's generally like pushed around that like consider that, because then it can kind of get you past at least the initial stage. But then I think that if it comes across as disingenuous, then that can be more problematic than it is beneficial. So I would also advise people to think carefully before they make those sort of choices for their CVs as well.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Actually, I have a wife from Afghanistan myself, so I tried to change my last name to her last name. But no, it will not happen. So I'm disappointed. When we got married, it was quite a while ago. But maybe Snea have a question here. then it might be quite relevant because I mean, love took you to Sweden, but you have a Swedish husband or
Yes.
yeah. So maybe it's not the same use case, but yeah. How about the?
Yeah, so I think for this one, Sneha, you can get a job and transition to a work permit, but you cannot switch from a dependent to a main applicant from inside of Sweden, which means if you make that choice, then you would actually have to leave Sweden for the decision. So I think that's important to know. You do have to have a job if in the future your spouse has a work permit, so you're a dependent of that, and then you want to apply for permanent residency in the future, then you need to have your own finances, but you can't actually switch between dependent to main applicant from inside of Sweden without leaving Sweden for that decision.
There are formalities for everything, so
Yeah.
to say. So, and I've been, I've heard about quite many actually like cases that where the employee or someone who gets hired by a company hears from the company that, oh, we are going to solve the immigration process, or all these kind of things, but then they mess up. What do you have to say? What do you want to say about this kind of thing? Is it up to the individual to actually make sure things are being
I
done?
think that, like, it's unfortunate that it has to be, but I think it's also important for people to, if you want to have agency over your life and your processes, then it does involve actually understanding what's required by the company. I think from a compliance standpoint, especially when it comes to extensions, or if you're going to change employers and things like that, there are things that you also have to collect from them. That I think that if you want to have agency over your situation, then understanding what the company also has to do is as important as understanding what you have to do as well.
Yeah, and I think this is quite an important topic because, like, coming to like being a newcomer in Sweden, like even if you are considering moving to Sweden, or if you are in Sweden looking for a new job, there are limitations in the job market. Like Swedish people, they have a bigger chance to get more. Like the job market is bigger from people that are like born and raised in Sweden, even if we don't want to say it. I think that's the truth. So I think in this case, it might be smart to help the employers out and make the decision easier for them, because many companies, like smaller companies in general, they haven't done this kind of like work permit things, and they might not have the connections like with Saaya, Emigreat, or anyone else. So if you make the process like, what should they do, how can I support you, simplify the things for you, I think that you will have much more opportunities to pick from. And the job, because like you might be disqualified just because, oh, this takes too much time. It's easier to go with someone who have who lives here and have a work permit and everything. So
I think you bring up a great point in terms of like going into interviews. If you understand what the company needs and what you need, then you can also go in much more solution oriented. Yes, I need a sponsored work permit. It's actually not that difficult. This is what we can do for it. I think that can help you, rather than just saying, yes, I need a sponsored work permit, because then it's too easy for companies to be like, oh, we're not comfortable with that, because the rules have been getting tighter. They have been getting more restricted, and it does scare companies a lot, especially smaller companies who don't want to make the mistake.
But the problem in Sweden might be that they will not tell you about that. So it's better for you to stay proactive and make the decisions easy for them, because sometimes they just don't say it. They just say that, oh, you were a good candidate, but we found someone else. But like here, it might be that you might be more qualified or better for the role, but it was a bit too much effort. That's a reality. I think it's just important to bring that up. To the table.
Absolutely. So I think you bring up a great point.
Cool. So not many minutes left, but I think we have covered quite a lot. I don't think we have so many more questions here, but just last thing, maybe, like we were discussing a bit about like job security and like how to handle that mentally? Like, is that like where we should like focus on in this last 1-2 minutes, or do you have any other like key takeaway or like practical advice that okay, this is the most important aspect to consider?
Yeah. I think we talked about this yesterday, but I think that like as an international, anything abroad, like you have to work under the impression that everything is insecure all the time. Like even if you have job security, you don't have job security. So I think that continuously making sure that you're upskilling and reskilling, keeping your LinkedIn active and up to date, continuing to attend networking events, which there are so many of those in Sweden as well, and then having a good understanding of like your requirements, how different things will changes in laws will impact you, what's your timelines when you lose your job, like having all of those things in place continuously, and like hopefully you don't have to use them, but focusing on ways that you can future proof yourself so that like if you lose a job, great, I have all these favors that I can call in, these are all these warm introductions that I can get from other people, is like taking the time to early to develop those relationships, I think can be really beneficial for your future, so that you're not scrambling, you know, a month before your grace period, in order to try to figure out what your next steps are. Like being really proactive, and always working on the assumption that you have job insecurity and residence insecurity. Not to be like fearful or paranoid, but just to like prepare yourself properly for a future that hopefully doesn't come, I think is really, it's imperative if you're living abroad.
So it's more about, it's not about being worried all the time. It's more about like having the mindset that like prepare for anything that might happen.
Exactly. Have your plan A, B, and C. Like have an active business plan all the time. Like, you know, it's just it's good practice, because you might end up being like, oh, actually, this could be a good business idea anyways. But it just helps you in the future so that you're not spending 3 months scrambling for yourself either.
Amazing, thanks for that. And do you have any like I don't know, super practical, super important advice for someone moving to Sweden, like who wants to move to Sweden, except visit Sweden wintertime?
I would say be realistic about, like, if you want to move for work, be realistic about what the opportunities are for you. I think in Sweden, what marketing and sales are kind of the two highest areas that have the highest number of educated people with the lowest amount of employment, in terms of we have so many people, Swedes, that have been trained in marketing and sales, that like that might not be the option for you if you want to move to Sweden, but like data scientist, anything kind of in IT, those are really big. And then look for companies that like notoriously hire international employees as well. So, you know, I know they just went through a layoff, but like Volvo, Spotify, Ericsson, there's a lot of companies that like hire internationals and that have a good understanding of how that actually works as well. Even with those, you should always work on the assumption of job insecurity. But like I would say the IT field is your best bet. So I think just being realistic about your education and your experience. If that isn't realistic for finding a job in Sweden, then like how can you train in the things that would be realistic to find a job?
Yeah, take initiative, go for courses and these kind of things.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing. Thanks a lot, Saaya. And we have a question here. Do you offer one-to-one consultations? And also like the main thing here, like how can people get in touch with you?
Yes. So you can either follow me on LinkedIn, Saaya Sorrells-Weatherford. I have an extremely long name. Or you can also follow us on Emigreat, as well as we do offer one-on-one consultations. They're 30-minute consultations. So you can either email me at saaya@emigreat.io, or send me a message on LinkedIn or follow us there. And the link to book a consultation is on my LinkedIn.
That's amazing. Thanks a lot for all these insights. We can spend 3 more hours deep diving into like one in each of these different topics. But hope you all of you that have been here have learned a lot. And you can reach out to both Saaya, of course, and you can also email me at Fredrik at HiCareer.com if you have any like questions to me. I'm more focused into like career coaching, recruitment. Saaya, you are more into like this specific topic. And also, if you have any feedback about this session, if you have any guests that you would like us to interview, feel free to email me. And also don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel because we have lots of more live sessions coming up. Maybe another session with you, Saaya. So let's see what will happen ahead. So
Yeah, absolutely. This has been fun.
Yeah, perfect. So next week we are going to talk with Pedro Reis Silva. He's based in Porto, in Portugal, working at Mimica. So that's a remote-first company. With they are founded in London, but they are like hiring like remote first. So the topic will be more about that. So yeah, next Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. So that's the next session, and I'm super thankful that all of you could join.
Nice.
Thanks.
Fredrik, you got a request to put your email as well.
Yeah, I will of course do that as well. Thanks for reminding me, Russ. Okay, perfect. So with that being said, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks Saaya. See you soon, and enjoy the sun.
Bye.